Maggie Smith spent decades proving that sheer precision could outlast any trend, that wit, delivered perfectly, was its own kind of power. Bob Marley made music that crossed every border it was never supposed to cross. Suzanne Summers turned a network's attempt to erase her into a decades-long career on her own terms. Sinead O'Connor never softened her voice to make anyone comfortable. She paid for that, and she never apologized. Steve Harwell reminded an entire era that pure, unironic joy still had a place at the table. Paul Rubens built a single character so complete and so strange that it became genuinely timeless, and he protected it fiercely until the end. There is a scene burned into the memory of anyone who has ever watched a Western. A man stands alone in a dusty street. His eyes narrow. The world goes quiet. And before a single shot is fired, you already know who is going to win. That image, that specific feeling, belongs, more than to any other single person, to Clint Eastwood. And the remarkable thing is that he is still here, still working, still shaping the conversation. Clint Eastwood is, at this point, something close to a self-generating myth. Directors in their 30s cite him. Film students in Seoul and Sao Paulo study him. The squint, the poncho, the silence, those choices he made on a low-budget Italian set in the mid-1960s have never stopped echoing. But to understand how he got there, you have to start not with him, but with the people who either pushed him forward, refused to believe in him, or changed entirely when he came into their orbit. The first person who shaped Clint Eastwood's artistic instincts was almost certainly his mother, Ruth Wood. She was a woman who loved jazz, loved music, and loved culture in ways that her Depression-era circumstances did not obviously allow for. Clint was born on May 31, 1930, in San Francisco, the first child of Clinton Eastwood Sr. and Ruth. The family moved constantly during the Depression years: Piedmont, Pacific Palisades, Redding, Sacramento, following work wherever Clinton Sr. could find it. What that itinerant childhood gave Clint was an early education in impermanence, in adapting to new rooms, new schools, new dynamics. Ruth encouraged the piano. She encouraged a sensitivity to art and sound that would later surface in the most unexpected places. Eastwood composing his own film scores, producing jazz albums, treating cinema as a form of music as much as storytelling. His father, Clinton Sr., was the counterweight. Quiet, disciplined, a man who worked with his hands and believed in showing up. Neither parent pushed their son toward Hollywood. There was no stage mother, no early auditions, no child actor phase. When Clint graduated from Oakland Technical High School, he drifted, logging in Oregon, working a blast furnace in Seattle, pumping gas. The military drafted him in 1951, and at Fort Ord in Monterey, he was assigned as a swimming instructor rather than shipped to Korea. That accident of geography would change everything. At Fort Ord, Eastwood met people already working in the film industry: actors, bit players, people who knew people. A fellow serviceman encouraged him to try acting. He was tall, he had the bone structure, he had a stillness that the camera tends to love. After his discharge, he enrolled in acting classes at Los Angeles City College and began making the rounds at Universal Studios. Universal signed him to a contract in 1954. For 2 years, they did almost nothing with him. He was in tiny parts, background roles, a B-movie called Revenge of the Creature. He was let go. This is the point in the story where most people's film careers end. But Clint Eastwood's career ended at Universal and then genuinely began because of a TV producer named Robert Sparks and a show called Rawhide. The CBS Western ran from 1959 to 1965. Eastwood played Rowdy Yates, trail boss, second in command, for 217 episodes. It was grueling television work, long hours, repetitive format, limited creative control, but it built something that no acting class or studio contract could build: an audience. Millions of Americans watched Clint Eastwood every week. They became comfortable with him. They trusted him. And then a filmmaker in Italy saw what that trust looked like and understood exactly what to do with it. Sergio Leone was, by 1964, a director with one spaghetti western to his name and a vision so specific it bordered on obsession. He wanted to remake Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo as a western, and he wanted an American face in the lead. He had already been turned down by Henry Fonda and James Coburn. Eastwood, still the rawhide cowboy to most eyes, was not the obvious choice. But Leone saw something. He saw a man who could communicate everything: menace, irony, control, danger, without opening his mouth. The two men spoke barely any common language when production began on A Fistful of Dollars in 1964. And yet, the collaboration produced one of the most influential partnerships in film history. What made the Leone-Eastwood relationship extraordinary was the tension inside it. Leone was a maximalist. Operatic music, extreme close-ups, elongated silences that bordered on the absurd. Eastwood was a minimalist by instinct. He stripped away lines that Leone had written. He stood still when Leone expected movement. He pushed back. And rather than destroying the collaboration, that friction created the man with no name, a character with no backstory, no clear morality, no allegiance, no real name, who somehow became one of the most iconic figures in cinema. The Dollars trilogy, A Fistful of Dollars, For a Few Dollars More, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly were not wide releases in America when they first appeared. They came out in Europe first, where they were massive. By the time they hit American theaters, Clint Eastwood was already a star on a different continent. When he returned to Hollywood, he did so on his own terms. He signed with director Don Siegel, a filmmaker who became one of the most important relationships in his professional life. Where Leone was the maestro of grand spectacle, Siegel was a craftsman, efficient, no-nonsense, interested in character and economy. They made 5 films together, including Coogan's Bluff, Two Mules for Sister Sarah, and the one that mattered most, Dirty Harry in 1971. Detective Harry Callahan, blunt, cynical, operating outside the rules, became a cultural lightning rod. The film was accused of being fascistic by some critics, celebrated as catharsis by audiences, and debated for decades as a document of American anxiety in the early 1970s. Siegel gave Eastwood the template for a character who asked uncomfortable questions about justice, authority, and individual action. Eastwood took that template and ran with it through 4 sequels without Siegel, understanding something Siegel had taught him. You do not need to explain your characters. You need to believe in them completely. From Siegel, Eastwood took the most important lesson of his career and applied it in the most unexpected direction. In 1971, he directed his first film, Play Misty for Me, while simultaneously acting in it. He was 40 years old. He shot it fast, under budget, with the Carmel coastline he loved as his backdrop. It was not a massive hit, but it demonstrated something. Eastwood was not going to be content being someone else's instrument. He formed Malpaso Productions, named for a creek near his Carmel home, which became his production banner and his mechanism of control. From that point forward, he produced nearly everything he appeared in or directed. He hired his own crews. He kept budgets tight. He answered to the studios as little as possible. The woman who most complicated his public image during his peak years was not a filmmaker or a rival. It was his partner, Sondra Locke. The two were together for about 14 years, from the mid-1970s to 1989, and made 6 films together. Their relationship was professionally entangled in ways that became genuinely ugly when it ended. Locke sued Eastwood for palimony, and while the case was eventually settled, the details that emerged, a development deal with Warner Brothers that Locke alleged was fraudulent and designed to placate her rather than advance her career, were damaging. A second lawsuit followed years later. The episode cost Eastwood reputationally in ways that his films never had. It was a reminder that the controlled image he projected on screen did not always extend to the relationships in his actual life. What is striking in retrospect is how little that controversy slowed the creative arc. In the 1990s, Eastwood made the films that would define how serious audiences ultimately judged him. Unforgiven, released in 1992, was the product of a script he had held onto for years, written by David Webb Peoples, waiting until he felt old enough to play the character truthfully. William Money, the retired killer trying to leave violence behind and failing, was Eastwood's meditation on the Western genre itself. All the myths he had helped build, examined without mercy. The film won 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director for Eastwood. He was 61 years old. The director who handed him that Oscar was not Leone, not Siegel, not any of the collaborators from his ascent. It was the Academy, an institution that had largely ignored him for decades, finally acknowledging what audiences had understood for 30 years. That validation mattered to Eastwood less, it seems, than the next project. He immediately moved to In the Line of Fire, then The Bridges of Madison County, then Absolute Power, demonstrating a creative restlessness that is itself one of his most underappreciated qualities. He does not rest on completed work. The relationship that surprised everyone and opened Eastwood to an entirely new generation of filmmakers and critics was his friendship and collaboration with Morgan Freeman. Million Dollar Baby, released in 2004, began as a passion project that no studio wanted to finance. Eastwood raised the money largely through his own company. The film, directed by and starring Eastwood alongside Freeman and Hilary Swank, won 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. He was 74 years old, a director winning Best Picture at 74. That number still staggers. Freeman, in interviews over the years, has spoken about what it is like to work with Eastwood. The speed, the confidence, the absence of second-guessing. Eastwood famously uses 1 or 2 takes. He does not obsess over coverage. He trusts the moment. Actors who come from more rehearsal-heavy backgrounds sometimes find this alarming. What Freeman describes is something closer to exhilaration, the sense that Eastwood has thought through every frame before arriving on set, so the actual filming can be loose, alive, present. That method is itself a kind of philosophy. Prepare so completely that you can afford to be spontaneous. The political dimension of Eastwood's public persona is impossible to ignore and difficult to summarize honestly. His 2012 speech at the Republican National Convention, the now infamous empty chair exchange with an imaginary President Obama, became an immediate and massive cultural moment, though not in the way he had intended. It was widely mocked, dissected, and debated. Eastwood himself seemed to accept the fallout with characteristic equanimity. He has described himself as libertarian in outlook, socially liberal on issues like gay marriage, skeptical of government overreach in general. The persona of the self-reliant individual that runs through his films is clearly not just a character choice. It reflects something he actually believes. Critics from the left have used his films as texts for debates about masculinity, authority, and American violence. Critics from the right have claimed him as a champion of traditional values. Eastwood, typically, has declined to be fully owned by either. His films, since 2000, have ranged across an astonishing variety of territory. Mystic River, a dense and devastating adaptation of Dennis Lehane's novel. Flags of Our Fathers and Letters from Iwo Jima, 2 films about the same battle made simultaneously from opposite national perspectives, with Letters from Iwo Jima conducted almost entirely in Japanese. American Sniper, the 2014 film about Navy SEAL Chris Kyle, became the highest-grossing film Eastwood has ever directed, and one of the most controversial. Critics debated whether the film glorified Kyle, complicated him, or simply refused to judge him. The fact that people were still having that argument months after its release is, arguably, evidence of what good documentary filmmaking does. It refuses easy resolution. Richard Jewell, released in 2019, is the film that has received, perhaps, the least attention relative to its actual quality. The story of the security guard, wrongly accused in the 1996 Atlanta Olympics bombing, it is one of Eastwood's sharpest examinations of how institutional power, the FBI, the media, destroys ordinary individuals. The film was criticized for its portrayal of a female journalist, fairly or not. And as an argument about the machinery of false accusation, it is precise and angry in ways that Eastwood's work does not always show. He turned 94 in May 2024. He is still working. Juror Number 2, released in late 2024, is a legal thriller, compact, focused, morally serious, made by a man who simply has not stopped. The current state of American cinema, dominated by franchise machinery and IP management, is a context in which Eastwood is almost uniquely himself, a filmmaker who owns his process, controls his output, and continues to make films about adults doing difficult things in complicated moral worlds. The people around Clint Eastwood, Leone, who unlocked him, Siegel, who sharpened him, the Academy that validated him, Freeman, who renewed him, Locke, who complicated him, the audiences who never really left him. Each relationship is a layer in a portrait that is still being painted. He has not announced a final film. He has not given a valedictory interview. The man who made an entire career out of withholding does not appear to be preparing a farewell. The stillness is still there. The economy is still there. And somewhere in the cinematic imagination of everyone who grew up watching those eyes narrow in a dusty street, Clint Eastwood is still standing, still waiting, and still, somehow, deciding.